As I said, 500 years ago this fall, a movement began in Christendom, which historians call the Protestant Reformation. On October 31st, 1517, a Catholic monk named Martin Luther, again, not to be confused with Martin Luther King, hung a notice on the church door in Wittenberg, in Germany, where he lived and served. And it listed 95 errors that the church had in their theology and their practice. And there was lots of opposition from the church leaders. And he devoted the rest of his life to study and to understand how to be able to bring the church into a line with what God had intended for it. He didn't intend to start new churches or anything else. He just wanted to change what was there. But when that didn't happen, followers and others that came after him said, we're fighting against the system, it's not working right now, and so we're going to begin and start something new. And God has blessed that. And even within the Catholic Church, the reforms that were needed back then eventually did take place that was needed. But God has brought his church to grow and to be alive and active around the world. And again, when the sermon gets online, you can learn more about the history of the Protestant Reformation that we had in last week's sermon. But we did talk about three things that came out of this. When God is reforming his church, he continues to keep building and rebuilding his church. Because we all get off track a little bit. We bring our human error into the way that we do church, not just the church services, but who we are as the church, what we believe, and how we respond and act and practice our religion. And so God continues to keep rebuilding us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Where are we at today? What can God do to rebuild us to be a reflection of him? The other thing we talked about last week is the church isn't perfect, but Jesus is. I mean, the church, we're always going to be able to point fingers and go, well, this isn't working right and that's off. And, we can do that. But we can't point fingers at Jesus. He's the head of the church, and he is perfect, and he's leading the church perfectly. And we're trying to follow, but we do it in a very poor way sometimes. So we don't want to put church on a pedestal, but just keep Jesus up there on the pedestal and worship him and not worship the church. Not that gives us an excuse to not do it right, but we have to keep our perspective right. And that God uses people to bring forth reformation. God is going to work within the hearts of people to bring the change that's needed. As he did in Martin Luther and others, he will continue to do that with us as well. Today, even as First Christian Church, what things I have to say may apply to us. Maybe it doesn't totally, but I'm thinking of the church here in America in general when I'm speaking today. So I'm not picking on us, but there might be some points that we can tweak and get back on track a little bit better. But just thinking in general, Christianity here in our country, the movement, the way that we think collectively, there's some things that need reforming. And I had a list of about 10 things that we could preach from today, but I've narrowed it down to 3, and they kind of all tie together. So we're just going to stick with these 3. These are some areas that I think today God is at work already, and he's helping the church to be able to reform, to get on track where we need to be. So it's not a feel-good sermon. It's not going to just make us happy, but hopefully it'll make us more holy. And so that's where we're going today. The first thing that I wanted to bring attention to is that consumer Christianity needs to die. And when I talk about consumer Christianity, it's a mindset that the church and my faith is all about me and what I need and what I want. It's a me-centered faith. It's a me-centered church. It's a me-centered focus. Instead of being asking things like, do I like church? What do I want the church to be? And leaving here dissatisfied because there was something in the songs we didn't like, or there was something in the sermon we didn't like, or we're tired of the color of the carpet, or, the myriad of things that we can complain about. But thinking about, is the church being who God wants it to be? That should be our thoughts as we enter, and as we're here, and as we leave here. What does God want for the church? Not just what do I want for the church, because if every one of us were to design our own church service and church people and everything else, we might have a lot of different ideas of what that should look like. But we're a collective body, and so we try to bring church to be something that hits everybody where they need to go. It's kind of like our kids. Each of our kids, if you line them up, they're different from one another. They each have strengths and weaknesses, and different congregations have different strengths and weaknesses as well. You can look at any church and say they're really good at this, but this is an area that they're not as strong in. And so churches are kind of like our kids, or even like us as people. We've got our good sides and our bad sides, but we're always trying to work to bring everything up to where it needs to be. Over the last 100 years especially, consumerism has taken over our country. It's in every area of life. It's all about being pitched that you need this, you want this. We hit 1 million times a day with marketers who are trying to get us to participate in what they have to sell. And unfortunately, that mindset of being able to pick and choose, last night my wife and I were at the store and we just wanted to get some coffee creamer. The shelves of coffee creamer was huge and we had to make a decision. And it's the same thing about church. There's so many different churches, and it used to be that, all the churches in town kind of were the same. There were some slight differences, but they were kind of all the same. But now churches are so different. You can go to this church and it has a very different atmosphere and flavor to it. You go over here, it's very different over here. And over the last 20, 30 years, the whole worship wars about, how are we going to do church in our services has been a focal point and a problem in our American churches, because we're so picky about, we want it this way, we want it this way, and we get in trouble with one another. So we have this consumer mentality that's spilled over into the way we do church as well. It really doesn't matter when it comes down to it whether we sing old songs or new songs. It really doesn't matter if we have a choir or if we have a worship band. It doesn't really matter what our communion trays look like and we have disposable cups. It doesn't really matter what time we start, what time we end. It doesn't matter if we have PowerPoint or bulletins, or if the pastor's dressed in a suit or blue jeans. These things don't really matter. Does it matter if the sermon's 14 minutes, which is about as short as I ever get, or is it 28 minutes, which is about as long as it ever gets? Those things really don't matter. Whether we sit or stand, whether we belong to a certain denomination or not. These things really don't matter when it comes down to it. Unfortunately, in some years past, the church itself was losing its vitality. It was losing the way to connect to people. Because now we are so diverse, and the things that you connect to, and you connect to, and you connect to, and you connect to, that each of us connect to, are so different from one another. And so people come to church and say, I can't connect with that. That's not my style. And that consumer mentality has caused us in the church over the last generation or so to go, what style are we? Who are we going to connect with? Are we going to connect with that person or that person? Or we're trying to connect with everybody and then we lose everybody. It's been very frustrating for churches to keep up with the consumer mentality that's there. And so as a result, churches have tried to become cool. They've tried to become attractive to the people that are out there, to try to get people to come to their church. Because a lot of churches are losing people because they're not attracting. And so this has been a huge part of our generation, and you're aware of it too. You see it happening, and you're aware that there's this response. But coolness isn't what the church needs. Being like it always was and losing relevance is not what the church needs at all. What the church needs is maturity. We're like the little kid in the Walmart toy section. Okay? What's a little kid in the toy section like? Oh, I like this, I want this. They're just grabbing. And that's the way we've become as the church in America. We're grabbing this, we're grabbing that, we're grabbing this, we like this. And we've been immature. So what we need to strive for is maturity. Not to be old and unable to connect, and not to be cool because that's the latest fad. We need to be mature. And that's what we need to do. Ephesians chapter 4 talks about this. Let's look at these verses. Paul says to the church, he says, we must all attain to unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God to maturity. It's about maturity, folks. To the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. It's about maturity. It's about growing up and not being caught by the consumer mentality that causes us to keep turning our heads. Ooh, this church is doing that. This church is doing that. That's cool. This is cooler. Well, this is the coolest. That's not what it's about. It's about being mature. I get asked this question a lot. People say, what kind of church should I go to? And I tell them, choose a church based on these three factors. One, does this church help us worship in spirit and truth? Can we truly worship God in spirit and in truth there? Does it help us grow in our faith? Can I leave the church service? Can I participate in the life of the church and be deeper in my faith as a result of what goes on here? And does the church help us serve in love? It's not about just giving, it's about serving. And as a church, we try to give people different opportunities to serve, depending on what your gifts are. You may be a person that gets up front and speaks. You may be a behind-the-scenes person that gets things ready and takes care of the needs that need to take place. There's so many different things on that spectrum that we can do to serve God, and we want everybody to be involved in serving in one way or another. And so I say these are the three things. If the church helps you worship God in spirit and truth, it helps you grow in your faith, and you're able to serve in love, then that's a great church to go to. If a church is missing one of those ingredients, then it may not be a church that you want to get involved with, because you might suffer as a result, or your family might suffer as a result. Or you need to go there and help it become better in those areas. Sometimes God will use us to go into a place where there's a deficiency and to be able to bring it to where it needs to go and be reformers ourselves. So does the church help you worship? Does it help you grow? And does it help you serve? That's my advice. And I hope you're here because we're able to do those three things right here at First Christian Church. And I hope that that is a goal that we have that we can all look at. Sure, there are details about every church that you don't like. There's even things about this church I don't like. But these things are the most important things. Even me as the pastor, can I worship in spirit and truth here? Can I grow in my faith? And can I serve in love? And if I can do that, then I'm happy to be here. And I hope that's your criteria as well. But what happens is there are churches all around that say we need to try to outdo what they're doing and try to be the place that people will want to come to. And so that becomes a problem. And that goes into our second point I wanted to bring today. Our church needs reform because we, as Christians, need to take the church to the world. Imagine that you open up this incredible hamburger stand. They're the best burgers in town. But what if nobody in town wants hamburgers? They just want chicken. If you can have the best hamburgers there are, but they're not going to come. It doesn't matter how awesome your hamburgers are if they don't want it. And what we have to offer, unfortunately, a lot of people don't want it. They don't want it. People have been blinded by the lies of this world, and the things of God are seen as old-fashioned or boring, especially compared with everything else that's out there. And people are blinded. We live in what is a post-Christian America. There are few people that think that what is offered here is important to them. And so what people say is, well, we need to find a new method to get people into the church. What's the gimmick? What's the thing we can do to be able to attract people out there to get in here? And so we think if we change our methods, that's going to bring people in. And it's everywhere. And believe me, there are all kinds of conferences and books and seminars out there. This is what worked at our church. You do it and you'll be in the new building program before you know it. People get caught into methods. You know, even in the last few years, we've had a lot of methods that we've changed. Okay, you got a new pastor. Did people flock to the church because a new pastor came? No. You know, we got screens and PowerPoint. When those went up, did that bring people in? No. We got a worship band. Does that bring people in? No. People think if it's flashy and new, or we offer this, or we do that, or we have this seminar, we advertise that people are going to come. But again, go back to the hamburger stands. People aren't hungry for hamburgers. They're not going to go. If people aren't hungry for God, it doesn't matter what we do method-wise, because they're not going to come be a part. Now, there's nothing wrong with the new pastor or the music or the PowerPoint, everything. I mean, that's great. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. The methods are okay. But if we're counting on methods to get people into the doors of the church, it's not going to happen. The method is how we do church. And there are so many different methods that are all good. And they work in different situations with different people and different communities. You know, the methods are good. But what the churches in our land are missing is mission. They're missing mission. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? What is our identity? Because if we don't get the why, then the hows are just another method that we put all our money and efforts into to try to reach the lost. Our motivation is good, but the methods, the how, is not where we start. We start with the why. As you know, since I've been coming here, I preach a lot about why. I want us to be able to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Because if we have the understanding of that, there are 100 different methods that could work or not work. And those will fall into place if we know who we are. Just an example. You know, for years, churches have a VBS in the summertime. But for a while, we would have our VBS, but it wouldn't reach very many kids. It's a great method. It works in lots of places, but it wasn't working here. And it wasn't anybody's fault or reason. It just wasn't working. It goes back to the hamburger stand. But when we say, let's do it together with other churches, and let's think about why. Instead of us having a better program than the church over here, let's work together and let's just reach our community. Because when we work together, that's a mission that people get excited about. Not just another VBS to go to. Yeah, we can send our kids to this one or that one or both of them. Those are hows. But the whys, let's come together in unity. And let's pull all our resources together. And let's have a great VBS for the kids. So we jumped on board with the other churches. And it works. We did that with the youth ministry. I mean, if every little church in town had a little youth ministry of 5 or 6 kids, that's nice. That's a how. We could say, we've got this youth ministry, and this is our name, and this is who we meet, and this is what we do, and we go on these trips and do that, and all these things. Those are hows. But again, when the churches catch the vision of why, listen, these kids are together all week long. Let's help them see themselves as one big team for Christ. Let's do our parts and work together. It catches on. That's a mission, not a method. So when we focus on mission first, then the methods come. Why did we get the screens and use PowerPoint? Not because it was a method, because it was a mission, because people are visual and not just using their ears. I mean, every one of us has spent how many hours a day looking at some sort of screen? Whether it's a big screen or a little screen, we are screen people in our culture. So let's use screens for God. It's very normal to look at a screen. And we're visual, and that connects with us. And so we bring it into our worship because being visual and using screens fulfills a mission that helps us to connect with God. And not just connect with an old friend on Facebook. These screens help us. It's a method, but if we took down the screens or electricity went out forever, we'd still have a mission of doing church and doing worship that's not dependent upon that. But the mission that we have that's going to attract people is because Jesus came and he had a mission. The mission we read about, and Jesus said in Luke 4:18 and 19, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to do what? To proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovering sight to the blind, and set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." He said, this is the time God has come to earth, and he's going to radically change people's lives. And Jesus did that. He radically changed people's lives. He was on a mission, and he wants us to have the mission that he had. He wants us to give people love and hope and peace and truth and light. And as we team up with Jesus on his mission, he continues to bring those things. And when we go to our job, when we go to school, when we go home, when we're out in the yard, when we're at the store, when we're at the ball game, whatever we're doing, we bring the mission of Jesus with us wherever we go. And we are instruments of love and peace and truth and life and hope to the world. So we take the mission of Jesus, and if we're living mission and focused on that rather than the methods, that's going to make a difference to the world. Now, they don't see the mission inside the church because they're probably not going to walk in the doors. But when we take the mission of the church out there to our everyday lives, then we are the church going to the world. And that's who we are. And I've talked about that a lot here. But that is what we do. We live mission. And the church across America needs to get that, because that is how we're going to make a difference. The third thing, it's kind of related to that, all these things as well. But people outside the church aren't really interested about being a part here. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the church aren't that interested in being a part here. A lot of people across this land think that it's good enough to check off the box that I spent an hour on a Sunday morning sitting in a pew, spectating, listening, just nodding my head and walking away feeling a little inspired and feeling good because we sang an old song that our grandma used to sing, or we sing a new song that we heard on the radio, or, you know, again, it goes back to the consumer thing. Church engagement is key. People need to be engaged in the life of the church, not just attending church. It's really easy, especially as a pastor. I meet other pastors, and the first thing we say is, how big is your church? You know, we talk numbers. How many people come on Sundays, you know? And, honestly, on a Sunday, we have much less people attending than we have people who are engaged in our church. And I always kind of feel frustrated knowing how to answer that. I'll say, well, on a given Sunday, we probably average about 75, 80 people. Sometimes we hit 100. Sometimes it's a bad day and we only have 60. But when I think about it, and I have a list of all the people, I mean, if you look through the directory, I mean, we've got about 150 people who are engaged in the church in some way. You know, so do I measure church by attendance, or do I measure it by engagement? Now, having more people here on Sundays is important. And some of you are from a generation, or you've been taught that, man, you don't miss church. I mean, you are here every Sunday. I mean, that is like very, very important here. And if you're here for the right reasons, because of mission, and because you want to worship in truth and grow in your faith and serve God, then that's great. I mean, I really don't want 100 people being here who are just bumps on a log. I'd rather have 10 people that are alive and caught on to the mission. I mean, that's more success than having big numbers here. So church attendance is great, but what's more important is church engagement. Are the people that are connected to this church, are they a part of the life of the church? Are they involved in things outside of an hour on Sunday morning? Not to make your life more busy, but to make it more enriching. To be involved in the life of the church in so many different ways. That's why we keep offering new opportunities. And we don't want any person to think they have to be at everything that the church has going on, okay? Because that would consume your life. But we offer different things and different times and things so that we can catch as many people in a way that they can engage in the life of the church. Last week, I shared a verse that I said, this would be a great challenge. Go home and memorize this verse. I don't know if any of you did or not, but I'll throw it out there again. If you don't know this verse, go home and learn it. Make it a part of who you are. In 1 Peter 2:9, we're told that we, the church, we are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his possession, that we may proclaim the excellencies of him who called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. This verse is really good because it tells us who we are. I mean, we're chosen into God's family. He's made us priests that can serve him and talk to him. We're holy people, and he owns us. But then it tells us what we do. we proclaim how excellent God is, because he took us from darkness to light. And we proclaim that in many different ways. Now, there are some people who think that going to church is an optional thing, because I've got so many things going on, and depending on where it ranks in priority, I'll show up when and if it's convenient. And you know what? The reality is we live in a day of age when there's lots going on, and there are lots of choices. It used to be that on Sunday morning there was nothing else to do but go to church or stay in bed, right? I mean, it was pretty simple. But now, it's very complicated. Because first of all, you don't even have to get dressed up and leave. You can just listen to something on TV or a podcast or on the internet. You can totally feel like you connected with church by even sitting at home. We could definitely catch up on what's going on the internet, some shopping we got to do, the social media things. There's stores that are open. There's the yard and the car and the house that needs attention, and I've been busy all week long and I haven't had time to give that attention. There's entertainment things, there's shows, festivals, all kinds of things going on weekends. So, hey, let's go away and let's go do these things. Sports, it used to, there weren't sport things on Sunday morning. Now there's sport things on Sunday morning. And if you're involved in sports, you feel this, the game's scheduled at 10 o'clock on Sunday, so I got to be there. And work. There's just a lot of jobs now that really want people to be there on Sundays. And there are legitimate reasons to miss church. We have to figure it all out before God, how he wants us to honor the fifth commandment, to take a day as holy unto the Lord. What does that mean? Ask God, what does it mean that I take a day that's holy for the Lord? And make rest and worship a part of that in some way. How we spend our time is a reflection of our hearts. And, I'm not standing up here every Sunday and going, who's here today? Oh, they've missed 2 or 3 weeks in a row. I mean, that's not the goal. The goal is to be engaged in the life of the church. You may have legitimate reasons to miss, and that's between you and God, but stay engaged in the life of the church. Don't just come to attend church, but engage in the church. And across America, we have churches that are filled with attenders, or attendees, maybe the word, but we don't have people that are engaged in the life of the church. I want a church with every person that walks in these doors is engaged. Their heart and their mind and their bodies and their souls are into this. I can tell you, there are times that watching a church service on TV is good, but that pastor doesn't know his TV audience. He may proclaim the word of God and God can use it, but he doesn't know you. I know you. When I am preparing sermons and I can prayerfully put it together, I know the people in my audience and I know how to tailor it right to, not the specific person, don't think I do that, but as a whole. You're receiving something that's personalized. You don't get that on TV. If you're sick or something's going on, that TV preacher is not going to be there for you. And nothing against TV preachers. I'm just saying, but here, don't neglect the community that we have here. The other people in the TV audience aren't going to be there to be by your side when you need them. But the people sitting around you will. Because that's what we are. Don't neglect. Don't be on the sidelines. Don't just attend. Come in and leave. Get involved. Be engaged. That's what we need across America. And these 3 things, I think, all kind of tie in together and help us see who God wants us to be. How do we practice out our faith in a way that makes a difference? Because one by one, we can make a difference, but group by group, we can do so much more. And God lives in us and wants us to be a part of this. 500 years ago, the church went through reformations. God's continuing to bring reformations, and I think as we look through our life, hopefully some of these things will continue to improve, both here and around us as well.